Welcome to Resume the Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Page, and I'm here to spread the message that you can, in fact, be happy in your career. I'm a former executive recruiter turned career coach, and I am obsessed with learning about why people have chosen their career, what led them to that decision, and how they achieved happiness in the process. So, come join the ongoing conversation that exposes you to career paths of all origins with one thing in common: happiness. So, press play and let's resume the conversation with this week's episode. Today on Resume, we have a very special guest. Michelle Enjoli is here with us today. She is a career development coach and keynote speaker who teaches strategies on how to fully own your career growth and development. She was a first-generation college student who landed her dream job as a television producer before graduation. Since then, she has worked and developed content for global brands in television broadcasting and marketing like Univision, Telemundo, ABC, NBC, and CBS, Mercedes-Benz, and Delta Airlines, among many more. In 2016, she created the first all-inclusive business resource group at Mercedes-Benz USA to connect leaders and professionals with each other for growth and development. She ended up expanding this work and developed a curriculum on an entrepreneurial career with a focus on networking, personal branding, and self-esteem that helps professionals and leaders learn how to connect for professional growth and success. She also has an idea worth sharing on her TEDx talk, The Most Important Connection to Make for Success, which is featured on TED.com. Her journey and work has been recognized by the Better Business Bureau and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She's been featured in lots of magazines such as Entrepreneur, Forbes, Glassdoor, and the Rolling Stone, which is insane. She also is working on an upcoming book. Oh, she is featured in a book, called Hispanic Stars Rising, The New Face of Power. And she is currently working on her first book. Oh my gosh, I'm tired reading that. I feel like, cool, I'm done. I'm done for the day. That just made me tired. First of all, thank you for being here. Clearly, you're super busy. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I have so many things that I want to cover with you. Obviously, you've done so much, but I like to start off by asking everybody, if you are at a dinner party and, you're all dressed up and you're feeling really good and you're schmoozing and somebody will inevitably ask, Michelle, what do you do? What would your response be?
It's interesting because there's a lot of people that in the last couple of years have thought negatively about that subject. And I find that to be so fascinating because they're like, well, we're not what we do. We're actual people, right? But what we do is a huge part of who we are. So I love that question because you can learn a lot. So what I say I say to people, I'm a people and brand marketer. I love to market brands and I love to market people because what I do is for my career development speaking and coaching is I help people learn skills to help them market themselves.
And we're going to dive into all of that soon because there's so much. I feel like the whole personal branding thing has really, I don't know if it's taken off in 2023. So this will probably air in 2024, but we're recording this at the end of 2023. And, just looking back, I feel like before this year, I had maybe heard that term here and there, but I feel like I hear it almost every day or see it on Instagram. And maybe that's just because I've created a feed that, the algorithm shoots that out at me, So I definitely want to go over that with you because I know that you're super skilled in that. But I want to go back to little tiny baby Michelle and ask her, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
Yes. So the interesting thing when I talk about a dream job, I tell people that can change, right, throughout your lifetime. And so for me, my dream job, so I loved reading books. I loved everything about storytelling. I loved reading stories. I grew up in a very large Hispanic family in a town in New Jersey, not too far from New York City. And what's interesting is that I grew up loving and listening to stories and coffee. And so one of the things that was interesting about my childhood was my mom was the only girl out of 8 kids. She had 7 brothers.
Wow.
And so at my grandmother's house, we called that the center of the community. We would have neighbors, people from different countries, all walks of life. And so in the mornings, I'd stay at my grandmother's house a lot. I would always be looking forward to, she would be making her traditional coffee and there could be anybody at her kitchen table. And so as a result, I grew up like listening to crazy stories, fun stories. And so when I was about, I would say like middle school to early high school, I said, I want to tell stories. Like I want to talk to different people every day. I was very curious. And long story short, I did my research and said, I want to be a television producer. I'm like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great to get paid to work on a show like the Today Show or something where I could like go online and search for interesting and cool people and do features on them. So my first dream job was very specific. It was to be a television producer for a morning show because I loved the mornings, I loved coffee, and I wanted to be human interest pieces. So that was it.
Wow. So I love that when people know, because I think that's like 90% of it, I think, just getting really clear and knowing what you want to do. I want to ask you really quick, forgive me if this is like the wrong way to ask it, but from what ethnicity are you? Like you're Hispanic. Where is your family or where did they originate from?
Yeah, no, my parents were both born in the Dominican Republic. And so they both came to this country as I think 10 or 12 years old. And so I was born and raised in New Jersey, but they were from it. So I grew up with a large Hispanic family around me. And what's interesting about it is that my first language was Spanish. And what's interesting was that when I was about to start kindergarten, my mom told me the story that they did not want to accept me because I did not know English. And she intentionally taught me only Spanish so that she would ensure that I would be bilingual, which was, I thank her today.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And I feel like my dad's generation, so he's a boomer, his parents, spoke French and didn't want their kids speaking French. Like they were like, you're American, right? Like that was the whole thought process back then was like assimilate. My great grandmother changed her name. She was Marie Paget and then she changed it to Mary Page, right? So I love that your mom had that presence of mind to be like, you live in America, you're going to speak English at some point, but you're here in my house now and this is our language. So I think that's so great and important and sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was interesting because my grandmother didn't speak English. Like she knew certain words as an immigrant, but she didn't speak English. And she was like, a big part of our caretaking, days. And so my extended family as well and neighbors, it was a large, big Hispanic community. So I think that was also a reason too, because that was a language that I was predominantly speaking at home. But she also had the understanding that 1 year in school, kids are sponges, right? They would absorb the language. And that's exactly what happened.
I love that. That's so interesting. So speaking about family and, having this big family around you, were there any kind of external expectations that were placed on you from either your parents or your grandmother or even just like your community that was like, it's an expected thing for you to do XYZ? Was that something that, surrounded you as you were making this very clear decision about what you wanted to be?
Yeah, for sure. So being the daughter, like I talk about, I'm a first generation American, I'm a first generation college student. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility. And it's an interesting thing because I've spoken about this a lot with other Hispanic women that are in the same shoes as I was. They're the first generation Americans. They come from immigrant parents. And there's so much responsibility because growing up, for example, I was the interpreter for the family. Like if there were doctor's appointments, I would have to go because I now knew English and I knew Spanish. You get this added responsibility and there is this expectation put on you that you will be the first to go to college. You will be the first to get like the big job. There wasn't any like specific expectations as to what job. It was just, learn to read, learn to be a good writer, go to college, explore, and do all the things that we didn't do. So that was pretty much the general expectation for me.
Yeah. And there's a lot of responsibility. You mentioned that. And one of my best friends is Turkish and she's actually an immigrant. So she was born in Turkey and came here, but she came here young and she was exactly what you said, like kind of the interpreter for her family and ended up like, she was like, yeah, when I was like 12, I was signing checks for my dad for his business because he did, and I'm like, that is crazy. Like it's things that I didn't have that experience. That wasn't my reality growing up. So it's just such a crazy concept. And I love that you found a lot of freedom within that, where it was like, okay, I'm supported and they want me to go to college. And you were like, let's do it. Like, and this is what I want to be. So I know you said, talking through coffee and hearing all these crazy stories. So how did you focus in on producer? Because I feel like most people would think of the anchor or the person like in front of the camera asking the questions. So if someone's listening and they're like, you kind of have an idea of what the producer is. Maybe you've watched the morning show, which is like, so I would love to hear your thoughts on. But yeah, what if someone's listening is like, what's a producer do? Can you kind of give us a little background on that?
Yeah, sure. So a producer is responsible for producing segments. So for example, the easiest is like the Today Show, right? So the Today Show is comprised of small news segments, right? So for 5 minutes, they'll talk about like at the top of the hour, the top headlines. You have a producer that's responsible for that. So they decide what specific headlines they will talk about. They will work with the editors for any like footage, right? Any visuals, anything like that. And so for me, it was interesting. I didn't want to do that kind. I wanted to be the type of producer that talked about the fun segment on the morning show. So for example, go and discover somebody new in New York City that was building a business from something interesting, or like I wanted the human interest pieces. And so that was so growing up in such a interesting family where, for example, unlike other kids, and you alluded to that earlier with this level of responsibility, unlike other kids who were kind of listening to perhaps their parents talk with their friends, like I was listening to my family and friends talk about real world problems. Like, did you find a job? Because so-and-so just came from Cuba or Venezuela or Mexico or Dominican Republic, right? We were solving like real world problems, talking about their children. And so for me, I don't know what about that experience made me want to almost like uncover the hidden jewels. So for me, that was New York City. I'm like, there's tons of people out there, the underdogs, like the mother who started a small restaurant on the side street corner with like a little truck in Manhattan and grew into a brick and mortar store and now is making, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those were the stories that I wanted to uncover and feature. So that was my like preferred niche.
I love that. I love that so much. Little backstory. My husband's Brazilian.
Okay.
So he was born there and came here when he was 4. His mom was like a teen mom and had 3 kids and is exactly what you're talking about. Like, little tiny apartment. They moved around a lot, and ended up doing like, she's a fantastic cook and ended up having like this catering business and this little shop. I think what you're talking about is really like the root of America, right? And how it's like rising up and doing the thing that you have to do in order to make it work and like really dealing with all of those setbacks in like a positive way and channeling it like through positivity. Were there any like internal expectations that you had for yourself that either, were just in respect to your, future or like personal future or your career that dictated kind of that path?
Yeah, for sure. So I knew very early on that I wanted to do something that I loved. So this is what's interesting, right? Becoming the daughter of immigrants who had to find a job, right? A job that provided for their family. That wasn't necessarily their dream job, right? But it was a good job that provided for your family. For me, set that expectation of, I don't want to just have a job. I actually want to pursue something that I really enjoy. And so for me, that was my only expectation. I don't know what it could be, but it definitely has to be something where I wake up every day and I'm like, I can't wait to go to work. And so luckily for me, that did happen, but that was the big expectation that I put on myself. Hence why I struggled and networked and did, all the things that I needed to do to get there, because I knew I wouldn't be able to survive like 30 years working somewhere where I wasn't even remotely interested in the work. I was just doing it to get by.
I love that, because what you're kind of talking about is how it's almost a and it shouldn't be, but it's almost a privilege to be able to go after and pursue a job that you actually enjoy, right? Because especially if you're coming to the States and just needing to figure out how to put food on the table and, support your family, you kind of, like you said, you're just doing it to survive. And that whole concept of, pursue your dream job ends up being this privilege, which is ridiculous. It's, I think, like a human right to be able to do something that you enjoy to do every day, right? So this is so crazy. And I can't wait to hear this. So you secured your dream job before you graduated. So how the fuck? How did you do that?
No, it's so interesting. So one of the things that I did was when I was in high school, I was taking a television production class. So that's what solidified, like, okay, this might be definitely, I want to study broadcast journalism. And so what I did was, but however, I was very cognizant of the fact that I needed to be close to New York City, right? That was a number one television market in the world. And you'll love that. You'll laugh at this story. One day I was sitting in college. So I went to a local college in New Jersey that had a live news program. So they would air on a weekly basis, I believe, a live news program. And so I was like, oh, well, that's great training for me. And then I was also close to New York City. So I was thinking I can do internships. Like I want to be as close as possible to the place that I want to eventually get a job at. To me, that was just my common sense thinking. Now that I look back, I'm like, that's probably like part of like my immigrant background, being very logical, like you cannot waste any time. Like for me, I didn't have the traditional college experience that most people had where they go away and they get to kind of go and study for 4 years and experience college. I commuted every day to school because I knew that I wanted to get the part-time job at the radio station or do the internship in New York City. And so what I did was when I was in college, I chose a college that was close to home. It was in the same town that I lived in. And what I did was I did every job. So I went for that program where I was, I anchored one day on the local news show. I was the producer one day. I ran the teleprompter. And I used the resources at school. So the instructor of that course, he was the one that saw like my passion for it. And he had recommended that I go for an internship at a local television station. And so that is how I got my foot in the door as an intern for a morning show. And so at that internship, aside from doing I was one of those people that was driving at 4:30 in the morning on a Saturday morning, getting up at 4:30 to be at a radio station in some small city at 6 a.m. on a Saturday to deliver the morning news as a radio anchor. Like I was doing everything possible to learn how to write, learn how to read for television and for the media. And so at that internship, I literally helped and added so much value, which is what I teach people how to do today, that it was a guest that I used to help when she appeared on the morning show. I used to help her all the time. You know, those guests that do those segments that are like the 5 best gifts for Mother's Day, something like, she would be like a local, like a regular. Well, she was also a regular on the national morning show. So what happened was I helped her so much when I let her know one day during coffee, as I was helping her, that my internship was almost over. She's the one that said, well, wait, they're looking for an assistant producer for the network morning show in New York City. And she literally introduced me to what would be my first boss and paved the way for me to get that interview. And so I built a brand so well at that internship that I had so many people vouch for me. And that's how I got the job. I was literally in shock. Like when I left that office building in New York City that day, and it's funny because I'm actually having coffee with my first boss in television next week. We still keep in contact.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
I literally cried on the way out. I'm like, this just happened.
Of course. Of course. I feel like you would either cry or just be in shock. Oh my gosh. I think when people think of networking, it's like everyone gets, and I think just reframing it in the way that you did it's just connections. And, even on LinkedIn, they're called connections, not your network, right? And the connections are people that you actually know, and you're not using them for it. Like you weren't using her for anything. You were just there trying to bring value and do your best so you felt good about yourself. And that is attractive. She was like, this chick knows what's up and knew that you would add the same amount of value, if not more, a place with larger stakes and all of that. So how old were you?
I was 21, maybe, I think.
Oh my God.
Because what I did was, so here's another thing too. I didn't have the traditional college career. I had to do college part-time because I had all of these extra side gigs that I knew I needed to do, right? So I had 2 choices and I knew that very early on. It's either take 4 years and go to school full-time and get the education, but that wouldn't allow much room for me to get all this extra experience that I knew that I needed and exposure to get in. And so what's interesting was, and I forgot to tell you the funny story. I was sitting in class one day. It was an evening class because, again, I had all these little jobs that I was trying to do. And I remember telling a guy, he was much older. He might have been maybe in his mid-30s. And he said to me, what is your dream job? What are you trying to do with your degree? And I said, well, I want to be a television producer in New York City. And this man legitimately laughed at me and said, well, you just want to be like on the cover of Vogue, don't you? And I'm like, excuse me? He's like, well, what you're trying to do is great, but it's next to impossible. Like, you're going to have to move to like 12 different markets all across the country, like working like Wichita, Kansas or something, like that. And then maybe if you're lucky, you'll be able to come back to New York and get the job. And I'm like, well, thankfully, that was either motivation, that could have served as motivation, or served as like me putting my head in the sand and being like, this is never going to happen. Thankfully, I used it as motivation. And so, I think I graduated school. It might have taken me 6 years, but it's because I was doing all this extra legwork to get this job, right? That was option B. Option A could have been go to school, graduate in 4 years, but then look at my diploma and be like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah, which is what a lot of people do because we're kind of told to do that.
Exactly.
And we're told that's going to work out. And then it's exactly what you said. You graduate and you just have this, whatever, 40 grand plus degree hanging behind you in your vacant apartment, right?
Exactly.
How did you have the presence of mind to take that as motivation and not as like a big whack to your ego and to your dream?
I think that it's, again, goes back to my upbringing, again, being the daughter of immigrants, right? I've seen, a lot of my uncles, I'm close to all of my uncles. I've seen my uncles who came to this country, like one of them I'm very close to at 18 years old, my parents, but my uncle came at 18. So my mom came at 10, so she got the education necessary and learned English. I have uncles who came at the age of 18 years old who did not know any English, have to come to this country, get a job. They bought homes, they built families. And so I think being brought up with that kind of resilience, and again, going back to those early morning kitchen table conversations, I was used to hearing stories of survival of, hey, so-and-so just came to this country with no family because he's got to support them, make money to support them back home. And my grandmother would, rent out a room to them or something like that to help them out. So those early morning conversations were about, oh, I got fired today. Now I need to get a new job, or I haven't found a job yet. What do I need to do? So I was always around conversations about problem solving and motivation. So I think that might have added to that sort of like resilience to be like, well, and probably part of me was just, well, I shouldn't probably talk to you because you're nowhere near where I want to be. I should probably listen to and talk to my professor at school who's had experience, has been in the industry. So maybe that's who I'll go to. So that's where kind of I think that comes from.
Yeah. And from what I'm getting is just like you grew up hearing stories of people doing the impossible like every day. So it didn't really seem that impossible. Like that wasn't a crazy, it actually wasn't impossible to you. It's almost like, well, I've seen that happen time and time again, so I can do that. Okay. So you were in producing for a while and you made a couple little career pivots, right? Okay. So take us through, if you don't mind, take us through those. So you were in producing, which was your dream job. You ended up, and I'm just getting this off of, what we talked about beforehand, and you were in a little bit of event management for a while. Mm-hmm. So how did that journey happen? How did that turn go?
So you'll love this story because that career pivot, I tell people that pivot is what led me to do what I do today. So this is interesting. So I was in television production for a number of years, did all the, I did Oscar segments for The View, all the fun stuff that you see on television, I did that. But after a number of years, that is a wear and tear on you mentally and on you physically. I was running around all of New York City. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, I need a change. This is also a very catty, competitive environment where you're constantly having to, deal with the devil wearing Prada women all the time. Oh. And so I had a friend who worked at this public relations broadcasting agency that I worked at, who left and went to go work for this speakers bureau, this event management company. And so she calls me up one day and says, I know that you're burnt out. I know that you're about to go crazy. They're looking for someone here to help them with speaking engagement and event management and stuff. Would you be interested? And of course I was like, sure. And what was funny was that the company was like a block and a half away from where I was currently working. So lo and behold,
New York.
I know. And I did
right there. Yeah,
exactly. And so I did my research. I said, well, I don't know anything about this industry. I went, got the interview, got the job. And so for a year and a half, I worked doing speaking engagement for politicians, celebrities. It was amazing. I didn't know that this world existed. I didn't know that people got paid. I knew there were authors, so I thought that was the job, right? Or you're a politician, or you're, a high-level executive or a sports, an athlete. And so I was like,
someone
this
quote
is
unquote like important.
exactly. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like people, this is another gig. And I was like, this is a very profitable side gig that these people have. And so that kind of planted a seed for me. Lo and behold, going back to networking and connections, I wasn't looking for a new job, but like about a year and a half later, or like a year and a month later, someone reached out to me who I used to work with and said, hey, Mercedes-Benz. Now get this. This is like the power of networking and connecting with people. Mercedes-Benz had a headquarters in New Jersey, and in the basement, they had a production studio. Who would have known? Where they hired people to produce their video content, some of their digital stuff for their marketing. And so they said, hey, they're looking for someone to come and help them. Would you want to come? And I'm like, oh my God. And it sounded fantastic. And that's through a connection is how I then made the move and started working for Mercedes-Benz in their production and marketing department. But how crazy is that? I would have never known.
It's so crazy. Yeah, of course. Like, yeah. And so what year was this around? I think that's
This was
important to know.
about like 2008, 9 or 10.
Okay, so it's right when digital marketing really started to be like very important. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you were at the event
It's like a speakers bureau. It's a speakers bureau. Yeah.
Okay, speakers bureau for about a year, right?
Yep.
That's so crazy. And something that you said there, like, just brings me back to one of the like main reasons. So thank you. One of the main reasons that I started this podcast, because so many people are unhappy in their jobs and don't even know about different careers. Like there are so many careers that exist that you just have never even heard of. There are fields, there are industries that like people just haven't heard of because they're either really niche or they just haven't been exposed to it. So I love that because you're like this walking example of someone who's like, I didn't even know this happened. And like, look, I had all these transferable skills and also like leveraging all those connections. So who, just out of curiosity, what was the connection that brought you to Mercedes-Benz? Like in what capacity were they a connection?
It was my first boss in television. So the one that hired me while I was still a college student, he found out through a former colleague of his, hey, I'm looking for someone. Do you know of anyone? And that's when, again, one of our coffee chats, I always have coffee chats with people. He mentioned it. And that's how I went and got the interview and landed that job. So again,
Wow.
I will say that if I can give it a percentage, 95% of the career opportunities that I've had has been through a connection. It has not been through me cold calling or applying, I've had positions where I've interviewed and gotten the position and they're like, oh, wait, you have to go back and apply like online. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Like for paperwork.
Yes. But that's why I believe so much in the power of connections. In today's world, I tell people, and I coach some of these people, I've coached people with degrees from Harvard that don't know how to make a connection, a genuine connection, and are struggling today in their professional lives. So it's super important to learn those soft skills, how to connect with people.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you ended up at Mercedes-Benz in their basement doing these like cool, commercials and content before content creators were. You were like the OG content creator, right?
Yes. Like definitely.
Yeah. And so you ended up there. You were there for a while. You were there for like, how long were you there for? Like almost a decade or so?
Yes, because what happened was, which is interesting, I landed there with one job because they were launching some like digital communication thing in dealerships, was doing that for like a year, then moved to do video production because again, back now, this is 2010, 2011, video production is ramping up with social media, like Facebook is the thing. Instagram is launching, all that. And then I was there. And then this is what started what I do today. The second kind of light bulb was in 2015. I was working in the digital marketing department. So I moved around a little bit, which was, again, me trying to grow and again, network with different people. 2015 rolls around. And from one day to the next, the CEO decides to move the company to Atlanta, Georgia. And
from New York.
From New Jersey.
From New Jersey.
Yes.
Okay.
But here's the traumatic story about that. But here's why I do what I do today. It was so traumatic because for cost savings, right? A company had been there for a while. I don't know the exact reason why, but I'm sure it was something with cost. And so we get told, now rumors are swirling that this is happening like 6 months before it's actually, told to us. And what's happened is it's done in this weird fashion where, January 6th of 2015, we're called to like this town hall where the president confirms, hey, we're all moving. We're going to Atlanta, Georgia. And it was like, this is what we're doing. And then we have cocktails afterwards and champagne. The next day, I arrive at headquarters and there are bodyguards in the building, and we are told to go to our desk and wait until, now this is like 8 a.m., 8:30, wait until you are called by HR and your general manager to be told, I guess, whether you make it or you're going to be offered to move or not. Courtney, I had to sit there from 8 a.m. to about 3 p.m. was when I was called, and see coworkers and people crying or leaving. I then found out that people that were not being offered to move and were basically told, you're not going to have a job in 6 months, like your last day is June, whatever, were being told first. And then in the afternoon, they were telling those of us that were like, hey, congratulations, you're being asked to move.
Oh my God.
And so that was trauma number one, because I was like, wait, what? Atlanta? Like,
what HR initiative? Who created that HR initiative? That is
exactly.
insane.
It was crazy. And so I decided to move with the company because, again, I'm like, well, you know what? Let me go check it out. This could be an opportunity. But it was torture, Courtney, from January to June, which is when I physically moved, to watch coworkers who had never done a resume since like 1982. I had to help them redo resumes. There were people crying at their desks. I had someone who got so desperate who like was filling out hotel cleaning job applications because she was so scared about like not having a job because she had been there her whole life. So that to me was like a big wake up call of, oh my God, like you can still be a good employee and give to a company. However, you need to make it your business to develop yourself, grow, build connections, because at any moment, and it's not, most of it is not personal, you could be out of a job. And so you've got to be able to know how to recover. So that was the initial light bulb for what I do today.
Okay. And what do you do today, Michelle?
So I coach people, but I have a little different perspective. So most people think I'm a career coach where I help people like interview and do resumes. I can do that, but that's not my focus. I call myself a career development coach because what I focus on doing is teaching people how to brand themselves, how to network so that they are consistently open to new career opportunities. So I don't believe that you should ever not be open to a new job. You could have landed a new job yesterday. It's okay to still have conversations with people. And so I come from that mindset of you're an entrepreneur, whether you work at a company or not, you own a brand and you've got to consistently sell and market that brand just in case you have to one day pivot or, your services, you're told your services are no longer required and you have to, find a new employer. And so that's where I come out of it, is teaching people those soft skills so that you prepare yourself to consistently market yourself.
Yeah. And it's also just not helping, but allowing people or giving people permission to be continuously, curious. And I think a lot of people get bored in their jobs because they kind of forget that they still are allowed to, explore different interests and explore different careers like on the side. And, I think what you said about everybody is an entrepreneur at this point, especially with social media and, personal branding, which I'm going to ask you about. But everybody is or has the option to be like an employee / entrepreneur, an employeepreneur, if you will.
Absolutely.
And it sets you up in a way that, one, you're not going into work and operating out of fear of like, okay, I better do a good job. Like I have to keep this job or else like my world will collapse. You're going in so much more confident and being able to, bring that energy into a company like you did throughout your career. People, that's like a magnet. People go to that and recognize it. Even if you're not 100% sure of exactly what you're doing, having that mentality of like, I'm going to go see, and I'm trainable and I am curious. Like people really gravitate towards that. So what can you say about your, speaking and coaching and how all of that kind of comes together? So you do, one-on-one coaching, I know you did a TED Talk, which I want to talk about. In your one-on-one coaching, you mentioned personal branding. So what does that mean and why is it important?
Well, I tell people all the time, right? Personal branding. So it's funny because I this quote has stuck with me for years. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, he said once, personal branding is what people say when you are not in the room. And this is so important, right? Because think about it, right? Amazon, Apple, Nike, all the big brands. they can't sit there and say, hey, we're the best producer in, athletic apparel, Nike, we're the best, without the customers willing to spend the money, right? So you cannot sit there and say a statement when, people have to also verify that, right? With their money.
Like there has to be proof.
Exactly. And so what I teach people is that's so interesting because most people and professionals, right? They will, do a LinkedIn profile. They have a resume. They'll put up a headshot, which is great. That is personal branding. You're putting out information out in the world, but are you known for that? So for example, I help people, I walk them through having a valuable personal brand to me is being known for something. So for example, I'm known as a connector. I connect with so many different people. I'm known as a brand person, a brand marketer and a people marketer. So for example, I love telling stories. I help people tell their stories. I help brands craft some stories, things of that nature. And so what I did was, how did I build that personal brand? I had to do it in my everyday life, right? So even at work, right? Find opportunities so that you can solve those problems that you want to solve. People have to know, oh, well, if you have this problem, go to Michelle for that. And so that's how you build a personal brand that is valuable. But you have to first know what is the brand that you want to know for or want to be known for, then execute and then verify if that's the brand that you have, right? So even with something as simple as I tell young interns, showing up to work on time, right? Being present, all of that stuff adds to your branding. And so I tell people all the time, this is what gets you, having a valuable personal brand is what gets you in the door where other people can get through. Again, my experience, I got opportunities because of word of mouth and people, provided me as a referral from a trusted source.
Right.
And so that's what that means. And so for me, I tell people personal branding is understanding where you want to go, what's a career goal that you have, and then building a brand that will get you there. But it involves not just stating what you are, you have to live that every single day so that you are then known for that.
Yeah. And would you say if someone has some difficulty figuring that out, right? If they're like, well, I don't know. I don't know what my personal brand is. Where do I even start? I'm a whole complex person. How do I pick one thing? What would you say to them?
Well, I tell them, first off, ask the people around you. Well, first I will say, you can ask people, for example, hey, and this is a great question because I've done this a couple of times. What is something why are you friends with me? Or why do you keep in contact with me? What value do I add to your life? Be honest. And people will they say to me all the time, Michelle, you're so helpful. If you don't know something, you will look it up or you will connect me with the person. I'm known as a connector. You will give me the resource. You're good with that. Some people, it could be you're super funny. Other people you're a great problem solver or you're a great writer. So I would say ask your professional circle. So where you work today and your personal circle. Hey, how do I bring value to your life? But then also start observing. What do people come to you for every day? So at work, are you the person that people come to because you have amazing cooking recipes? Are you the person that people come to for advice? What is that? And that's where sometimes people are so busy just going through the day, doing the job that they're told to do, that they never take a step back and take a 360 analysis of, wait, what value am I bringing to the company? And then I also tell people for this time of year, end of year, when you're being evaluated, those end of year performance evaluations, that's a great opportunity to not ask specific questions of your supervisor. Because I've had this in my corporate career. Someone will say a generic statement oh, Michelle, you showed great leadership quality. You know what? I did this myself. Can you give me 3 examples of when I showed a leadership quality? Because then I can put that down. I'm and this is the social proof of it. And that's how you start building and understanding what your current brand is. And then what I tell people is, if you have a specific career goal, you want to get that promotion or you want to get a certain job or get into a certain industry, figure out what the gaps are, right? What do you need to get there? And then make sure that you put that as part of your execution plan to start being known for that as your personal brand so that you can get there. So it's just a process.
Yes. And something that you said that's really interesting is, asking that employer, give me examples, give me a couple examples of what that is. That is great because if I was an executive recruiter and, one of the best things a recruiter can ask are for examples, right? So when you were in this job, give me an example of when you did XYZ on your resume. You say you have leadership qualities and blah, blah, blah. okay, like anybody can say that, but give me an example.
Exactly.
And then so you had someone tell you that's an example. So you don't feel like you're pulling something out of your whatever. And like B, if they call that person as a reference, you know that they're already going to back you up. So it's like just helping you like clarify, yes, like what people come to you for. And it's also really arming you with everything you need if you end up on the job market or in an interview and someone asks you, because that's hard, that's a hard question. And a lot of people are like, oh God, an example, like, oh my God. And it's a really powerful interviewing tool. Cool. So I want to, oh my gosh, do we have time? Yes, we do. Okay. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your TEDx? First, I think people should know, like, what is the difference between TED and TEDx? And then also, if you could just tell us a little bit about like what you talked about and why, that would be so awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So the difference between TED and TEDx, so TEDx are local events. So you have to apply for like a TEDx license through TED. And there are local events that happen all over the world. And so typically the way the event works is if you say, you can't just say, oh, I want to be a TEDx speaker. You actually have to apply and get accepted. But typically the way it works is that you have to find an event because each event has its own theme. And so the topic that you're either experienced in or want to talk about has to fit that theme, right? And so for me, it's always been connection. For me, and then what happens is once you do the TEDx, then that video does get posted on TED.com and it can be, viewed upon. So this was during COVID. And so I had started my coaching business officially, I would say like in 2019, like April 2019. It's now 2020 and I talk about connecting and I teach people how to network. And so the connecting word was coming out very strong. And so what I did was I did a Google alert for TEDx talks. So I recommend anyone that, is interested in doing one, do Google alerts for a TEDx talk. And so around, I think it might have been like March or February of 2020, Southampton, England, someone had applied for a TEDx talk, a TEDx license, and the talk was called Human Connection. I'm like, that's me. And so what I did was
I raise your hand.
Exactly. And I said, well, wait, what can I talk about? Like, what's something that I can talk about? And what was interesting was that I did have a sort of out-of-body experience, and that's how I start the talk about, was in 2018, where the title of the TEDx talk that I applied for was The Most Important Connection to Make for Success. And it starts with me driving home in 2018 from work, having a moment where at a stoplight, I literally had maybe it was a panic attack. I don't know, but it was some moment where I was so unhappy. I had a voice that said to me, are you happy? Like the words, are you happy? Were like basically blurted out. I don't know from where. And so I had a breakdown where I called my mother, I called my partner at the time and was like, something has to change because this is not it. Like my current life, like I've got to do something more. And so that's eventually what initiated my business, what initiated me to go into doing the speaking and writing the curriculum and all that stuff. And so I started like that. And basically the talk is about, what is the most important connection you have to make for success? And it's with yourself. And as a woman, right? And you know this, you're a mom, you have kids. We especially, men too, because I coach a lot of them, but we women, we tend to lose ourselves. And mostly men and women today with social media and all this noise, we sometimes go from college to, your first job, you become parents, you have a family. 20 years go by and you might have, in theory, on paper, the high-paying job and the title, but then you don't know who you are. I read something the other day or heard a podcast where someone said, what is the average age that people die today? Like, so think about what that age, what do you think that age is?
77.
It's 25. What? Yes, because this is what he said. He said, you die in your 50s, 60s, 70s physically, but most people at 25, think about it. You've already graduated college if you went to college, but you're in your first job. You stop growing. You just go through life doing the things that you're supposed to do for survival. You might switch a job here and there if you have to, but you stop growing. You stop being curious. Like life, the things that you've been through up until that point start to get the best of you. And so that's really scary. And I started to feel that way. Like I was like dead inside. Like I wasn't excited. Like on paper, people might have been like, you are crazy. Like you have everything that you want. You travel, you do these things. But no, I just wasn't feeling connected to myself. And so I had to go through that process myself and get out of that process in order to help people. So that's kind of like what the start of this new journey was for me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so crazy. So when you were talking about the age 25, there's like this thing. Oh my God. What was it? It was like, okay, so John Keats, he was like this British writer back in the,
Yes.
oh my gosh, like the romanticism. There was this whole concept back then that your genius peaked around 25, that after that, your like intellectual curiosity goes down and you just don't have like curiosity and innocence of youth coupled with that, maturation of your actual like brain development and mind and intellect. And after that, it's kind of just like goes down. And there was this whole like fear around it back then. And so that is crazy. That is so crazy. And, you kind of segued perfectly. So I am also a career coach. And one of the groups of people that I, that I work with a lot are those people that you're talking about who get like 15, 20 years into their career. And they're just like, how did I end up here? Like how, and looking forward, it's like this weird middle ground where you're like, how did I end up here? Also, I can't do this for the next 15, 20 years. Like it's like really like stuck in that like soul sucking kind of, dead inside, which I think, I don't know, maybe it's just something people like have to go through in order to like awaken in their heart and soul or whatnot. But thank you for sharing that because I think that's so relatable.
Oh, for sure. I just told you, think about it. I was in my early 20s when that person in that classroom told me that my dream was impossible. Think about it. Had I taken that seriously, who knows? I might have just been like, well, I'm not going to do this. Let me go and switch and pivot or stuff. And I also know young people now that I talk to all the time. So for example, they're 22, they're like juniors and seniors in college, and they'll call me up. Right. And they're like, Michelle, 6 months ago, I started an internship at this company and I was bright eyed and bushy tailed. And within 8 months, like the spark is gone from their eyes. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, I was reprimanded for this. And I was told that I couldn't give this idea and that. And I'm like, this is what happens to people. That's why 25, it's a scary number, but it points out, right? You're at the start of your career. You start at these big companies and you are excited. You're curious. And then all of a sudden, the older you get, that curiosity dies, right? That ambition might die just because you get beaten down so much by older people or other people.
I was going to say, it doesn't die. It just gets extinguished by other people.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why, like I say, people have to be really careful and kind of, I always tell people, reevaluate every 2-3 years and always be on the lookout. And this is something that it's interesting because people say this all the time, like, oh, no new friends. Like I have my group of friends and, I don't trust anyone. I'm like, you should always be looking for new friends, not new friends that you have to like talk to every day or whatnot. But get out there, be curious, talk to new people. You never know, like not just for professional purposes, but you might meet somebody really cool who you now might connect with more than you did your best friend who's maybe in a different stage of her life at the moment. Like always be open. It's a numbers game. I tell people, you're going to meet people that you never want to see again, but you might meet the one or two that you're like, oh my God, I'm so glad they came into my life.
Yeah. And to your point that you brought up like way back at the beginning, you change, like your dream job can change if you continue to change. So that's so funny. Like this concept of like, I don't need any more new friends is just basically like, I don't change. Like exactly. I'm just the same person. Like that's crazy. Yeah, that's so funny. Okay, so I know that we mentioned you're working on a book. Tell us about that. Tell us, what brought that on and when that did. You have to send me a copy when it comes
I definitely will. Well, no, we're friends now. We can connect with each other even on a quarterly basis. That's the whole point. But
connection.
I know. It's funny. I went to a conference earlier this year and I met a bunch of people. And it's so funny. I never did this, but I have like a digital business card. But here's what's cool. You know how you meet people at an event and most people will be like, yeah, we got to catch up. Like, give me your contact information. And you never do, right? I had this one woman who stood out. And we said the same thing, like, oh, we'll have to definitely connect when we get back home. And she said, no, open up your calendar and we are going to set a date and a time where we can catch up. It was like 3 months from then. And I'm like, oh my God, I love that. Because she's like, it was intentional. She had a reason why she wanted to stay connected with me. I had a reason, and we made it happen. And so I thought like that's really awesome and intentional about it. But yes, my book had went from one idea and had someone review my outline and say, well, you actually have like 3 books here. So you might want to like scale back. And so I've been in this process of, okay, well, how do I divide this into 3 books and which one do I start with first? But basically the first book, I don't have a title yet, but it's all about this whole entrepreneurial mindset, because right now, this is what's top of mind with layoffs, the way the employment sector has been the last 2 or 3 years. People are just like struggling. And so I want to maybe start off a series of books with a mindset shift, right? You are an entrepreneur. And these are the, these are the 7 mindset shifts that you have to take in order for you to understand how, what it means to build and maintain a personal brand. Do not attach yourself to a company. You can still be an amazing employee of said company, but you have to learn to continuously market yourself, develop yourself to remain competitive and be in the market. So that's where the first book is coming from, just a mindset shift, because a lot of people are either don't know about it or are having to face that because of something tragic happening, a loss of a job, a layoff, or something like that. So that's what I wanted to start with.
That's so fun. Oh my gosh. Well, I can't wait. Okay, so what else is next for you? Is there anything else that's coming up that you kind of want to bring attention to that we can find you, or is, what's on the, first quarter agenda for Michelle?
Sure. So I'm working now with a couple of companies where it's interesting. My passion, as much as I love working with professionals and leaders, but that 13 to 18 age group, I think is also a personal passion of mine, because what I'm finding out with younger professionals reaching out to me, they never learned how to network. They never learned what a personal brand is. They learned the things they needed to learn to kind of check the box and get jobs. So I'm working on something where I'm going to do some virtual courses for people in that age group from 13 to 18. Of like the basic skill set, like networking 101, right? I give them my definition. I run them through my frameworks so they can start practicing. So I've got that working. And then I'm working on a live, it's like a 9-week training course for people. So it's basically going to be called like how to attract new career opportunities in 9 weeks, where I go through my full platform of 1 week. We talk about where do I go next? What do I do next? Right. And then we go through all the different steps. How do you network? How do you build your brand? And I walk them through that full process so that by the end of the 9 weeks, they are fully prepared to build and maintain a personal brand that's going to bring opportunities to them versus them having to go out and look for them all the time. They have some sort of a game plan for them. So I'm excited about that as well.
That sounds awesome, and something that everybody could benefit from. Oh my God. Okay, so we do a quick little rapid fire with a couple questions. So
awesome.
What is the best career advice you've ever been given?
Do not attach yourself to a career. You are not a title. You are a personal brand.
What is your current favorite daily practice?
Outside walks.
Ooh, I love that.
Alone time.
What is since it's probably going to be January when this airs, what is your number one New Year's resolution, if you believe in New Year's resolution?
So it's interesting. I don't, because I believe in just kind of setting but if I had a New Year's resolution, it would definitely be to pick 3 main areas of growth. So I do that naturally every year, every quarter. I have certain focus areas. So for me, it would be, to choose what are, 2 to 3 areas of growth that I can work on next year. And for me, believe it or not, is one I have to do a better job at is to reaching out to completely new connections. I have built a very good wide network for myself, but I need to still be intentional about building completely new connections. So that's my focus.
Yeah. Continue learning. Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay. And last one. Do you know, and if you do, what is your Myers-Briggs?
I don't think I remember. I did it I want to say 10, 12 years ago. So I've
actually never asked to guess this, but I'm curious to know what yours is.
You have to look it up. I might have it still in my files, but I haven't done one in 10, 12 years.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. I know what my colors are. I know what my colors are. That one I did pretty recently.
Your colors.
Yeah. So they do. I did it maybe 7 years ago when I was at Mercedes-Benz, where they do this thing where you have your personality color. So for example, I'm a red and a yellow. Red are typically dominant leaders, but then yellow is the social butterfly. So I'm a mix of red and yellow, but then you have blues and greens and they all mean something. So that was a recent
Oh.
exercise that I did in terms of evaluation.
Oh, I've never heard of that one. Oh, I want to do
Yes.
that one. I'm like obsessed with personality tests. So the color personality test. Ooh.
Yeah, there's an official name. I don't think it's that. But yeah, if you look up what are your colors, it'll come up as to what it is. So that I remember doing
Cool.
that. Yeah. The other one, that's a number. I'm a 3, which is an achiever.
Yeah. And the Enneagram.
The Enneagram. Yeah. So I've done those.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't done them. I might have to do that soon.
Ooh, that would be interesting to know. Yeah, the Enneagram is good too. I'm a 3.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's remain connected.
I know. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, we are going to include all of the things that Michelle and I talked about today in the show notes. So if you want to go to TED.com and watch her TED Talk, if you are, want to get on her mailing list, we're going to have her, website. You can connect with her on LinkedIn. And yeah, keep an eye out for her. She's clearly, knows what she's doing. Keep an eye out for that 9-week course. And if you're 13 to 18 listening to this, I love that because, I feel like a lot of people, when they think of careers, obviously think of adults, and we don't think about where it begins. So if you are in, middle school, high school, get used to networking because that's such an invaluable skill. Cool. Okay. So Michelle, thank you so much for coming on Resume.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I'm so grateful for your precious time and energy. And if anything resonated with you, please feel free to share with a friend and subscribe. If you're interested in career coaching, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Courtney@resume-careers.com and follow me on Instagram at Courtney Austin Page. Thank you so much and see you next week.